Is your team not performing well? Is morale low and turnover high? Are you falling further behind the competition? I'm here to help. I'm Shani Magoski, and this is the Leadershifter Show, where business strategy and culture finally meet. Explore shifts of all kinds required to build cultures of trust, engagement, and execution excellence. I promise I am not your typical boring leadership consultant, and I will help you and your team get your shift together. Hello, Leadershifters, and welcome to another episode of the Leadershifter Show with yours truly, Shani. I am joined today by someone who is one of my favorite people right now because he is helping me so much. This is Mat Boule, and he's joining us from Montreal. Matt is a doctor of osteopathy, so he is a full-on physician, but he is also a posturologist. Well, what is a posturologist, you might ask? That's why you need to listen to this episode, because this is an approach to managing pain that emanates from the spine like I have never seen before. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to welcome Matt as a guest on the show, because more people should know about this. So Matt, welcome to the show. I can't wait to hear more about this and to share more about this with people who are watching or listening.
Thank you, Shani. And just for the record, in Canada, an osteopath is a practitioner of manual therapy. So we're not physicians, but it's the exact same title because DO refers for title in osteopathy, but just so that everyone's aware. So we could be referred by physicians, but we don't have the physician's card in Canada, although we practice osteopathy. So just so that we're clear on that.
Okay, got it. So let's just talk about what is posturology.
Posturology came from the frustration of my mentor, who's orthopedic surgeon by trade. In the 80s, Dr. Bernard Bricot from Marseille was an expert at operating children that had scoliosis. And basically what was popular then is what is still done now is that when children have scoliosis, if the degrees are too severe, we operate with a what's called a Harrington rod. And so it straightens out the spine, but it really does change a kid's life forever. They really just can't move their spine quite well ever since from that point on. And although Dr. Bricot was one of the best in France at doing so, he thought, could there be a better way of trying to get these kids back to be straight without life-changing procedures that are quite aggressive? And one has to know is that back in the 80s, if you looked at the different therapies that are out there for joints, for muscles, it actually hasn't changed since in 2023. You're looking at the big five. So chiropractics, which is really big in the States, physical therapy, massage therapy, acupuncture, and osteopathy for the ones who practice the manual type. It was the exact same back in 85. So what Dr. Bricot realized was that none of these techniques were actually addressing why there would be an imbalance that was so severe that created scoliosis or any other deviation, imbalance in the posture system. So he asked a few of his friends that were in neurosciences, and one has to think neuroscience is really big now. In the 80s, I don't even know if it existed under that. I mean, it did, but no one cared, and it definitely wasn't out in the mainstream.
Right.
So he asked a few neuroscientists to look into where is it that it could go wrong with the brain, because that was his hypothesis that could make the spine crooked. And what they found out, and it still holds true, is that there are two body parts in the human body that really create your muscular alignment, and they are your feet and your eyes. And when those two sensors don't function properly, two possibilities exist. One is that your spine takes a hit, so you develop scoliosis. The other possibility is that you don't have scoliosis, but let's say you look at someone, you look at them from the front and one shoulder is much lower than the other. In both cases, we're good now. We're good because you and I have been worked on. But in both cases, posturology is where you can actually truly fix these issues long term And that's really where it comes from. It comes from the frustration of a physician that was really, really good at operating the spine and who wanted to not do it.
Got it. And why hasn't it proliferated more? I mean, I'm one of those people who has tried all 5 of those modalities and then some. I've done all those. I've done Rolfing. I've done cupping. I mean, you name it. I've tried it and nothing has helped me alleviate the... Oh, and by the way, I had neck surgery. So C4, 5, 6, 7 are fused. And yet I have not been able to figure out how to address this pain. And it wasn't until my friend Louise, who is also a patient of yours, told me about you that I ever heard of posturology. So why hasn't it become more mainstream, to use your words?
Medicine is based on the evidence-based model, which has its strengths and weaknesses. And it's really hard to demonstrate that a technique like posturology works based on that model, because posturology looks at how many variables work on one system. And when you look at medicine, it's pretty much a matter of, okay, well, does variable A affect variable B? And if it does, then we produce a drug. And if it doesn't, we don't. But it's very linear. There is absolutely nothing linear about how the human body stands upright. So there are 2 main factors that play into how that works, the feet and the eyes, but there's actually 4 in total. The position of your jaw is the 3rd one, and whether or not you have surgical scars is the 4th one. So imagine trying to put in a bowl, right, like these 4 ingredients, and then try to come up with paradigms and recipes that, after they've been shown to work on a few people, are then tested on thousands and thousands of people. Mm-hmm. The algorithms don't work in the context of evidence-based practice. And so that's probably the number one reason why it hasn't made its way to the mainstream. It's not complicated, but it's complex. And it's actually quite simple when you practice, but it's very clinical. It's very easy to apply clinically. To draw conclusions that would satisfy the evidence-based model in medicine, it's just about impossible. And the second obstacle is probably the fact that it's from France. And if it's from France, Americans don't usually care. And I know this going, like, I teach in the US, I teach in Europe, I teach everywhere. So I see it going both ways. It's typically that if it's from Europe, a lot of the Americans and Canadians, to be fair, don't look at it twice, because they figure, bah, if it was really good, we would know about it. And if it was really good, we would have come up with it. Whereas in
arrogance, imagine that.
But whereas with the European, mostly in France, I find they have the idea of the American dream. They're fascinated by whatever Americans are doing. It seems to just go one way based on my 15-year experience.
Interesting. Well, and I remember when I asked you that question when we were thinking about working together, and you said that almost all the training materials are also written in French. And I mean, it seems like it would be easy enough for someone to translate them to English, but this will catch on, I have no doubt. Okay, so the 2 main things, the eyes and the feet. So give us a little bit more technical information about why those 2 body parts matter for posturology.
Yeah, so the common idea for the longest time, and often in science, right, if you stick to one idea for a long time, whether there's proof or not, it just becomes, in this case, it actually became almost religious, that it was the inner ear that was allowing us to stand upright. And so as long as there were no inner ear issues like vertigo and so forth, while most practitioners figured, well, what's the point of working on your posture? It's fine, although visually people could spot imbalances. But it's fine in the sense where you don't have an inner ear disorder, so let's move on. And that idea was believed to be true up until the 80s, where fundamental pieces of literature in neuroscience demonstrated that the inner ear only contributed to you standing upright when you were about to fall on your butt. So which is rare, right? Even in sports, you're most often just about pretty damn stable. Like, almost falling means really almost falling it and catching yourself. So the very vast majority of the time, human beings are actually not using their inner ear for much. But what they're using is their feet to counteract gravity, right? Because it's a lever that poses you with gravity. And they're also using their eyes to focus on the horizon. So if you look at my library here in the back, and the shelves were just slightly off. If they were even just slightly off, at some point it would drive you nuts. You would close the screen. We are wired to find horizontals with our eyes that basically are at 90 degrees with the gravity vector. So when our eyes move together to do so, we feel pretty balanced. And when our feet touch the ground the same way on the floor, that gives us a lot of solidity as well from the ground up. People that have posture imbalances have 2 feet that don't touch the ground evenly. They have 2 eyes that don't coordinate. So between those 2 body parts, you find the entire body, and the entire body will compensate with tilts and rotations in the shoulders and the pelvis. All of that so we can still stand upright. Now, with compensations, with the fact that we can't do it for long periods of time, with the fact that we blame deadlifts for the fact that, but we tend to blame a lot of what we do for the problems that we have, whereas when you look at it objectively, if we look at how the system functions and you have breaches in the system, those are the ones we fix. Instead of blaming what people do, we blame people for how they are. Although it's not their fault, it's still what it is.
Right. So let's talk about each one individually. So the eyes, like it was remarkably simple how you diagnose that I had an imbalance in my eyes. Literally sort of had me kind of cross my eyes and see if left and right were both in right corner respectively of my eyes. What percentage of people have that imbalance?
This is the reason why I think we can do so much better in this world. It's 80% of the human world population that has 2 eyes that don't coordinate to our liking in posturology. When you look at the criteria that are established by the International College, which is a worldwide organization, we've tested tens of thousands of people, over the last 40 years. And what's normal for us is not necessarily what's normal for your optometrist or your ophthalmologist. But it really should be that when we bring an object to the root of your nose, until the tip of the pen literally touches the skin of your face, both eyes should still be able to what we call converge. It goes beyond what's considered normal by basic ophthalmology criteria. But then again, we're also trying to balance the body in ways that is unheard of usually. So we are able to accomplish this repeatedly. So yes. So yeah, that's what we look for.
And are people born with that imbalance, or does it develop because of environment, or is it a combination?
So it's a great question, because there's a pediatric study done in Italy a few years ago that confirmed that it was about 3/4 of the newborns that were born with 2 eyes that weren't essentially aligned on the vertical axis. And these kids didn't have strabismus, right? Because typically we look for those signs and symptoms in kids that have a lazy eye that is medically relevant, which goes beyond what we do in posturology because it's medicine. So 73% of children that didn't even have their eyes on the same level. So the idea is that when these eyes start to move and coordinate and move together, which is then learned in the first year of life through the contact with the environment, then most of the time the dominant eye is the one that gains all of its functions, and the one that gets a little bit lazier is the non-dominant. So in most people, if they're right-handed, their right eye tends to be the good one, and the left eye not so much. And although that's extremely common, it's still not normal that we would have any form of a lazy eye, whether, medically relevant or functionally relevant is as far as what I look for.
Got it. Okay. And then as I have experienced firsthand, some of the exercises or therapy modalities that are prescribed have to do with balancing out those eyes. And yes. And these these exercises are not complicated, people. They're, in fact, I think because they're simple, they're focused, and that's why they're effective. And they get progressively more challenging as you meet one hurdle and you're doing it proficiently. Then Matt will up it to the next level of difficulty, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's turn our attention to the feet. I think it's more intuitive to people that our feet don't touch the floor the same. You see people all the time, like walking, with one foot straight and one foot off to the left, or just odd cadence.
Yeah. And even before we start with the foot, people might wonder, okay, so why are so many newborns born with this visual or this facial, asymmetry? Most likely it's because of the mother's pelvis. So if you give delivery with a pelvis that has a tilt and a rotation, the newborn will absorb it, specifically with natural birth, but definitely as well with C-sections. What people don't realize sometimes is that the incision is quite small for C-sections, and it's not rare that the baby's cranium will be mishandled. And the cranium at that point in time is actually quite mobile, and this is where it's easy to it's easy to manipulate the cranium in ways that are highly qualitative, so no one really cares, until the kid gets repetitive ankle sprains when he plays soccer from like 7 to 14 and no one understands why. But basically, because eyes work with feet and feet work with eyes. But that would be the reason for the eyes. The feet is even easier to explain, as well as it's easier to understand, as you were saying. So we're born with flat feet. I want to state that right off the bat, because a lot of people come into the office at some point, they're like, oh my gosh, I just realized like 2 weeks ago, I developed flat feet. And I'm thinking, no, they were always flat. You just didn't notice. We're all born with hypersensitive flat feet. And we're supposed to create arches in our development. And that's really from 0 to about 4 years of age. And year 1 is like pivotal for everything, actually. But year 1 is really when, for example, when you learn how to crawl. It's not so rare to see that some kids prefer crawling with one leg versus the other. And we can't say at that point in time that it's because they're right-handed or left-handed, because that hasn't expressed itself yet. And either way, for crawling, it would have no advantage to be better with a dominant foot. A dominant foot would be great if you're kicking a soccer ball and you want to score a goal. That's called a fine motor skill. Crawling is a gross motor skill, just like deadlifting or squatting. You're not supposed to be dominant when you squat with the right leg and your pelvis shifts to the right. So if you've crawled with both feet very evenly, you probably have more chances of developing really even feet when you stand, and then you don't walk so funny and you don't run so funny, and then you don't get the running coach telling you, okay, well, just think about like not slapping your left foot as hard as your right when you run. Like on the treadmill, you go to the gym and you hear some people are louder than others, but some of those people, it's one foot that's really loud and not so much the other one. And that's a direct reflection of these imbalances in how we've learned to recruit our feet. And that goes all the way back to crawling. So I make a big fuss about crawling, because when I get people to crawl as clients now, as they are adults, and I have them pattern it, it's actually coming your way. Give it a few weeks, you'll be on the floor crawl. If they have an easier time manipulating the right leg versus the left, if when they move the left leg, it doesn't feel like they even know where the leg is in space, I can't prove in most cases that it's because they didn't crawl enough with that leg, but chances are that's exactly what happened, because we're putting them back in the pattern that they're supposed to have completely mastered, and often enough, there's an asymmetry with how they recruit both legs. Therefore, there's an asymmetry with how both feet touch the ground. And then that creates an imbalance from the ground up. So people are stuck between their eyes and their feet. The eyes create an imbalance from the top down and the feet from the ground up. So it's like your favorite highway in any big city that during rush hour is blocked going both ways. Somehow you still make it home, or you still make it to the office, but in what state are you in by the time you make it? That's exactly what posture is.
So basically, it's 2 more things we can blame our parents for.
100%. But I mean, those are 100% their fault. And it's not that they do it on purpose. Realistically, even to this day, people aren't educated on how this all works. Where kids develop the best is in the least industrialized of all nations, South America, Africa, and we'll make this a bit controversial. If you look at the best athletes in the world where money is not involved, it's not white people. It's going to be South Americans. It's going to be Africans. And the reason is very simple. We make up in the industrialized countries as far as when we are really good in sports is because we need a lot of money and we tend to have it. But in sports that are more democratic, we are nowhere to be found. I believe it's quite frankly because of how we spend our first 2 years of life playing on an iPhone, not knowing how to crawl up until the age of 9 months. That's if we've even crawled, compared to kids that just literally grow up in contexts that are much more free. And,
right.
There's culture, but there's also environment. They both play into it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think about all the toys or like contraptions that parents stick their kids in instead of letting them just crawl around, because it's easy for the parents and you don't have those luxuries like you were saying in the poorer or more third world countries. Okay, so give us an example of just a couple of ways that posturology helps us create more balance from the bottom up, from our feet.
Yeah. So standing upright is stressful, and I guess some people can appreciate that statement more than others. So essentially my goal and the goal of anyone practicing posturology is to decrease the relative amount of stress that people have to work with in standing upright. I mean, gravity will win at some point, like we'll die, and we won't die standing upright. We will be laid down somewhere. It depends how we die, but I mean, if all goes well and we die properly, we'll somehow die horizontally, hopefully in one piece. Not that it matters at that point. It's a great conversation we're having, really. But so how posturology helps in the meantime while we're alive. So we use technology and exercises. It's a healthy mix of those two things in terms of stimulating the brain and the areas of the brain that are really responsible for creating uprightness. And because we've been the way we are, you and I, for the last 7 million years, if we look at evolution, but we've had a nervous system for the last 500 million years. And it started with jellyfish, basically. So jellyfish were the first species to develop a nervous system. They obviously didn't have feet. They weren't on land. What I'm saying is, the more we understand about how the nervous system came to be a player in evolution, the more we understand how human beings have been functioning the whole time, the more we can be appropriate when choosing how to work. And that's really what I like the most about posturology. It's really born out of trying to understand how it works versus just trying to push a model on people and saying, oh, this doctor says it's good, so you have to do it. Or this basketball player says it's good. Where we have that as well, but it's just not the premise, because I think we're more objective than that. So we use technology to stimulate the feet, and we use exercises to work on essentially all of what we call the motor patterns that we were supposed to integrate. I have a question for you. How many motor patterns do you think a child needs to integrate between 0 to 18 months of age? It's an astonishing number.
100.
So maybe I said astonishing and I shouldn't have, but it's 72 that we know of.
Right.
Maybe it is 100, because there's probably movement patterns that are just not, that haven't been registered, but we know of 72. So it really is a full-time job for a newborn to learn how to stand upright and move efficiently. And that is really the foundation of how that brain is built, wired. And it's the foundation for how the brain is built and wired for absolutely everything it will do later on. It tends to make you smarter. It tends to make you better at managing emotions. And it doesn't just tend to, it actually does, and there are studies on that. So the more we focus on how people have connected one brain to 600 muscles, the better we make them at being humans. And obviously in the workplace, that means they're more efficient. That means they won't burn out as much. That means they can do more. That means they can speak as fast as they do without getting caught up in their words. It's efficiency is the best word I can use. I have a lot of respect for all practices. I think everyone is needed. I'm definitely a fan of talk therapy, whether it's psychotherapy but I do fundamentally believe that as people are engaging in different forms of activities to improve who they are, because the first task that their brain had to be in charge of was connecting to muscles, I think that somehow that has to be a part of that big picture every time it's needed. And I haven't seen many people, or I haven't met many people where I could say, no, I think they're good.
Right.
Because most of us grew up in an industrialized country, which has a lot of advantages and opportunities and benefits. But kids now know how to go on an iPhone and they don't know how to crawl. And we see that more and more. And even the CDC has adjusted what they consider to be normal. So the CDC, ever since 2 years ago, has acknowledged that they went from saying it's normal if your kid stands upright at 12 months of age, and there were so many delays that now they say it's normal if it's 18 months of age.
Oh, lowered the standard, just like everything else is happening.
100%. And this is tragic, because what's going to happen, like there's actual studies that show that if you learn how to stand upright at 13 or 14 months, there's a difference in how you live the rest of your life. And there's a difference, obviously, between 12, 13, and 14. Like, we're wired to stand up on the day of our first birthday. Like, that's actually that's the engram. That's human evolution. So now we have physicians that are trained in saying if the kid doesn't stand upright at 16 months of age, it's okay, it's normal, as long as it's between 18. So the issues we're having now with people's physical, mental, and cognitive resiliency getting weaker is probably only going to get worse just because we're going to consider what sucks to be normal.
Jeez. So these are not just issues for people like me who have been athletes their whole lives, broken things, sprained things, and our bodies are compensating. And so we have massive imbalances. Plus, it's my parents' fault that I was probably born with, eyes that weren't symmetric, but whatever.
Yeah.
No. But in all seriousness, I know that you also work with a lot of children for the reasons you just said, because if this is a problem, in childhood, there are ramifications for their learning style and other maturation processes. But, since this is a show about leadership, I'm just thinking out loud here, as this generation of current generation and subsequent generations of digital natives, or whatever they call it, babies on iPhones, which was not the case in our generation. We were left to our own devices, and when we were small children, we played outside without supervision, and we scratched our knees when we fell, and it wasn't like child abuse.
Right.
This has implications for the current and newer generations coming into the workforce. So are you seeing any companies starting to pay attention to that as a risk factor?
It's funny you bring that up because I guess part of my career plan at some point was to make it in companies so that I could basically tell them what we're speaking about, and then we could intervene, because I train people in North America to do what I do. And obviously I've learned from the Europeans. I actually combined from everywhere in the world, right? I actually, most of my education right now comes from Americans in the last 2 years. So, but yes, 2 weeks ago, just signed the contract with the biggest firm in Canada for getting speakers in companies. And what got the owner of that firm going was the fact that this brand of personal development was brain-based, and that it had nothing to do with meditation or trying to relax or, getting massage therapists at the office, which I think is all very good, actually, right? Like, I think that's actually needed and welcomed, and I think that should keep going. But we were coming from a place where maybe we could make it that these folks needed less of the massage therapy, and maybe they didn't need as many timeouts. And if you even look at just the current trend, and I know we spoke about this, but the whole notion of looking at people's feelings and conveying to people's status and not wanting to be too abrupt, or it's not born out of nowhere. It's people feel, I believe, and maybe even a bit of the younger generation, they feel more and more like they need to be catered to, I find, listened, understood, appreciated. Whereas, I don't know, I remember starting in the workforce, and it's like it was up to me to figure a way to merge and
figure it out.
Yeah. And I mean, that's it. And so were my parents, and people are very sensitive now, is what I'm going to say. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think extremes aren't great in any sort of way. And I think they're sensitive because they haven't built robustness in that first year of life, where adversity, I mean, people think of adversity and they're like, oh yes, as a young adult or as a teenager. I'm like, no, adversity was when you were trying to crawl and you couldn't get that toe in the ground, and you were tearing from it and screaming. And at some point your mom was like, okay, I'll just pick him up from the ground because I'm annoyed. But adversity has always been a part of life. And really where we had to overcome it first was way before we knew we even existed, which happens at around 2 or 3 years of life. And quite frankly, it was based on motor development. So if we've done really well with our motor development, we don't need to be told to be tough and resilient later on. We've already wired the brain for it. We've literally lit up the parts of the brain for motivation, for resiliency. And I could break down all the brain parts, but that's not the point. But the point is that if they're not active in adulthood, We need external motivation. We need a kick in the butt, which it's good. I have a few coaches. We've spoken about this for everything I take on, and I believe in being coached, but part of it because of the expertise and part of it because I actually believe in external motivation. I think it's a part of what we need in a community, right? That we influence each other and that we motivate and that we're motivated. But if we're more intrinsically motivated, we can be a better player for everyone. We can be a better player for ourselves. So I think we need to work on both. And the intrinsic motivation comes from childhood development.
Wow. Okay. So this begs so many questions in my mind. So one is parents need to be more educated about this because they don't know what they don't know. And so part of what anyone who's listening should do is educate yourself and educate other people that things you never thought of, like whether you picked your baby up a lot when they were getting frustrated when they were trying to crawl, has implications for the rest of their lives, physically, emotionally, intellectually, are preventable, or at least, you can be ameliorated by changing some of the parenting patterns. The other thing in my mind is there is no reason that this shouldn't be an employee wellness benefit, just like massage has become, just like therapy has become, because this impacts all of our systems. So I'm going to encourage anyone who's watching and listening, and you're in a position to influence what the employee wellness benefits are at your company, to get more educated about posturology, because this could be a real differentiator for a company, not only as a great place to work, but for performance.
I would guarantee results like an instant that we would improve performance independently of the key performance indicators that the company would want to choose. I would go as far as to say I'm only willing to get paid once we've actually proven the results over a trimester.
Interesting. Well, that is an emphatic statement of how effective you've seen this to be.
Yeah. And we need to do it on bigger scales. And it's been done in Europe more so than it has here, just because it's evolved in a few countries there over the last 40 years. I'm responsible, and I have since 2020, for the development in Canada and the US. So obviously 2 of those years, it was hard to develop and to meet people. Even face-to-face handshakes were prohibited. So we've done as much as we could, I think, with Zoom. Now is the time to move forward and to meet people and to shake hands and to give conferences and for people to experience the process. As I've told you when I took you on, we actually guarantee that people get better every 6 weeks. And that's our promise. And they actually get progressively better every 6 weeks. So it's like if you look at your stocks, and every 6 weeks, they've gone up from 6 weeks ago. And that is continuous. That's that's our promise. So obviously, if we can promise that for one person, we can promise it for, a company of 500. And then the effect that can have on the entire structure, obviously, it's even hard to describe. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. This is all such great food for thought. Anything else, as we wrap up, that you think people should know about posturology that we haven't covered yet?
No, we did a good job, I think, of covering the basis. And I guess as a take home, that posturology really is the science that studies posture. And posture is not whether or not you think about sitting straight. That's ergonomics. And it's often confused. And people think, I'll just think about sitting straight. Well, you sit as straight as you've learned how to stand. And you've learned to stand as well as how you probably crawled and walked on all four. So the real answer, the real key, the real solution is to go back in time, which is actually possible with this process, right? You can't really do it in real life, but we know how a human being develops. We know exactly which patterns they do. We know which one comes before which one. And for myself, it's been 15 years doing this, so I can almost smell it, what needs to be done at some point. And I'm always learning new stuff, but the volume of people that I've seen and a lot of the people that I work with have seen a lot of people as well. So we obviously speak about this and we meet in events, and this is really big in Europe. So if I can be a contributing factor, and thank you for having me on your show, because this definitely helps. I'm more than open to discussing this with people of your network. And
yeah, I mean, that's part of what I commit to as a leader is introducing people to novel ideas that maybe they weren't aware of before. And so anybody who can help raise awareness of the effectiveness of this, and again, not just effectiveness for a human body, but all of the positive domino effects that transpire once someone has healthier posture, balanced eyes, feet that touch the ground symmetrically, etc. Like it pays dividends for people, teams, organizations, society. I mean, not to get dramatic, but hey.
No, but it really does. A good friend of mine who did his PhD in sports psychology in the US, he actually published a study that shows a high degree of correlation between personality traits and the type of posture people have when you look at them from the side. So people say, oh, but this is just how I am. And I'm like, this is how you've been up to now. And it's neither good or bad, but how can we give you more flexibility in how you are? So you keep your strengths. You won't lose who you are. You won't lose the good stuff.
Right.
But it's the lack of adaptability that you have and maybe being a little bit more like this sometimes. And what if you had access to that? What if you could keep all the good stuff you have, but what if you could be a little bit more, have more give within that? And
right.
that's what we see that we do. But yeah, so we actually have literature on that. Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Good stuff. Right. So how can people reach you for more information, or if they want to hire you as their posturologist like I have?
Yeah, for sure. It's my website, which is where I wear my hat for two reasons. One, I sometimes forget my name, and it's not true. But matboule.com. So it's MET, just one T, and then BOULE.com. And all the information is on the website.
Terrific. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Leader Shifters, I hope that you learned enough about posturology that you want to delve in deeper. So thank you for joining us, Matt. Thank you for joining us, Leader Shifters. Until next time. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Go to theleadershiftproject.com to sign up for the Scoop newsletter and explore all the resources from this podcast in the show notes. And follow me on Instagram at The Leadership Project and LinkedIn under my name, Shani Magoski, for inspiration and content about all things leadership. Make it a great day.